What so-called overreaction to something you did that you feel was entirely justified?
I divorced my wife after she let my parents into our lives despite me telling her not to do that. I had a very traumatic and troubled childhood and teenage years, thanks to my parents. My father was abusive, my mother was neglectful and just didn't care. Child protection was never called because my parents had mastered the art of keeping appearances. I tried reaching out to other adults but was always rejected. Even at a young age, I knew in my mind what they were doing was wrong. But I thought it was normal parent behavior and that somehow I deserved whatever was happening to me. My father was this big macho man who would punish me if I gave even the slightest hint of being gay. I wasn't and I'm not, but for him, showing of anything he deemed feminine movement or manner was cause for a correction. His methods to correct me ranged from physical beating to a more disturbing way, aka bringing a paid lady to persuade me to become a real man. I wasn't of the right age then. The first time he had someone over for me, I threw up. It only enraged him more, calling me slurs and telling me I better straighten up because I was a disgrace. My mother never raised her hand against me, but she was impassive to my father's abuses. Every time my punishment was done, she would go to me and tell me my father was only doing God's work to make me a better person. The last time my father beat me was the day before I left home for good. I never looked back. For the first few years after leaving home, I was a mess. The abuse I suffered from my parents took a toll on my mental health. It took me a long time to understand fully what I had been through and how I could move forward. Fast forward to 15 years later, I was now married to a girl a mutual friend introduced me to. I was honest about my past with her, about how I struggled and still struggling to become a good person without the toxicity that they instilled in me. She was aware of the abuses from my parents. I thought she understood me. She said she did and was sorry that I had to go through that. A couple of years after welcoming our first child, she sat me down and talked to me. She admitted she had been in contact with my parents because she wanted our boy to meet their grandparents. She herself lost her parents at a young age, so she thought she was doing our child a favor by giving her at least one set of grandparents. I was stunned. When I asked her how she even knew them, she said one of my cousins reached out to her and said my parents wanted to reconnect. That cousin tried the same tactic with me but I blocked him. She said that she had met with my parents and brought our son with her. She wanted him to get to know them. I was shaking when I heard that. I told her that that was unacceptable, reminding her of what I went through. She basically said that I should have forgiven them now and that I should get rid of the hatred in my heart. My parents were old now, she said, and my father had a health scare so they thought they would reconnect with their only child. My parents were not even in their 70s then and I didn't care at all if they suddenly dropped dead. I was apparently lucky that I still had my parents, unlike her who had been missing hers. When she didn't get the reaction that she wanted from me, she tried to guilt-trip me, saying that I was depriving our son of his grandparents. Our son has already met his grandparents. My wife brought him to meet them a few times while they were in town. She did not admit that fact to me because she didn't want to keep it a secret from me. Oh no, it's not out of the goodness of her heart. It was because my parents would be in town again the following weekend and she invited them over to our house to reconcile with me. I was dumbfounded. I told her I never wanted to see them again. I had been honest with her from the start. She knew what they had done. She knew the damage they caused and the journey I went through to undo it. But she was so blinded by "they are still your family" mantra that she disregarded my feelings and mental health. In an insane moment, I pleaded with her not to go through with it. It was bad enough that they now knew where we lived. I asked her to think about our son. I never wanted him to go through what I did, which would happen if his grandparents were in his life. She said it wasn't a good look that my parents were still around but I wasn't talking to them. And there it was. Like my parents, she was also concerned about our social image. She was not only in love with the idea of a complete family, but also with the image of a perfect family. The discussion ended with a screaming match. I slept in the spare room that night. Maybe she thought I would come around and see it her way. She couldn't be further from the truth. The next day, I dropped our son in daycare as per usual. But instead of going to work, I called in sick and consulted a lawyer instead. I asked to file separation leading to divorce. I made sure that our child custody was split equally between us two but with the stipulation that my would-be ex-wife would never allow my son to meet my parents ever again. I explained to my lawyer why that was necessary, and he agreed. My wife was still at work when I got home after picking up my son. I packed my things but waited for her to talk to her without our lawyers present for the last time. She called me all the names in the book when she got home. She said that I was making a big deal out of it and that I was taking the cowardly way out. It was her turn to beg that I think it over and decide the best for our family. I was doing what I thought was best for myself and my son. She wasn't included in my family of 2 anymore. I left after that. It had been several years since that day. We separated and got divorced shortly. There was no hesitation on my part. As I did when I left my parents, I also never looked back when I left my wife. My only concern was my son. We co-parented, but I never talked to her again unless it was about our son. I was the villain in the story, according to our mutual friends. They couldn't understand how I could just leave my family like that. They felt I overreacted. I didn't care. I also cut them off from my life and I couldn't be happier.
If you liked the story, please give it a thumbs up. Share the video and subscribe for more. Click the bell icon so you don't miss out on new videos. Thank you very much.